Conflict between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran in 2026 represents one of the most dramatic, complex, and consequential confrontations in modern international relations, a crisis whose roots extend deep into the turbulent landscape of 20th century geopolitics and which exploded into full-scale warfare in the early months of 2026. To understand the magnitude of this war, one must first trace the long history of mutual suspicion and strategic rivalry that has defined Iran relations since the early 1950s, when the covert involvement of the United States Central Intelligence Agency in orchestrating the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh permanently soured trust and set the stage for decades of animosity, an animosity that was exponentially magnified by the 1979 Islamic Revolution, during which anti-American sentiment became a powerful force in Iranian politics, and the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and imprisonment of American diplomats became an indelible symbol of rupture between the two nations, cementing a legacy of enmity that would haunt diplomatic efforts for generations. Over the ensuing decades, Iran's commitment to an independent foreign policy, its ambition to develop advanced missile technology and nuclear research capabilities, and its cultivation of regional influence through a network of allied militias and political movements across Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen only, heightened U.S. fears of destabilization, prompting a cycle of sanctions, covert actions, and reciprocal threats that eroded every attempt at détente, including the landmark but ultimately fragile Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, nuclear agreement, which gave way under mutual distrust, hardline politics, and failed enforcement mechanisms. By the time tensions reached a fever pitch in late 2025 and early 2026, decades of unresolved grievances, competing strategic interests, and mounting domestic pressures within both countries created a volatile environment in which miscalculations could trigger catastrophe. The immediate spark came in late February 2026, when the United States, in coordination with key regional allies, including Israel and selected Gulf states, launched an extensive military operation that would later be known as Operation Epic Fury, targeting Iranian military bases, air defense systems, ballistic missile silos, and facilities suspected of supporting advanced weapon programs. This unprecedented aerial and cyber offensive, supported by precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, and electronic warfare capabilities, was justified by U.S. leaders as a necessary step to neutralize what they described as an imminent threat, aiming to dismantle Iran's capacity to wage large-scale regional aggression, degrade its strategic infrastructure, and send a decisive message against further escalation. The strikes, however, did more than disrupt military installations. They reportedly eliminated key figures within Iran's political and military hierarchy, including senior commanders and advisors, which Tehran characterized as an act of aggression tantamount to war, sparking a furious and immediate response. Within hours, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, launched barges of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and armed drones targeting U.S. military bases across the Persian Gulf, including in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain, as well as naval assets in the Gulf of Oman, forcing American and allied warships to engage defensive countermeasures in one of the largest maritime confrontations in recent history. Simultaneously, Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow strategic waterway through which nearly one-fifth of the world's crude oil supply transits every day, effectively closed all commercial traffic, a move that sent immediate shockwaves through global energy markets, triggered emergency responses from international shipping consortia, and thrust the economies of Europe, Asia, and the Americas into a state of acute vulnerability. As nations scrambled to secure alternative fuel, routes, and storage reserves, the closure of the strait, widely considered a red line in energy security, instantly quadrupled insurance premiums for shipping in the region, escalated fuel prices at refineries worldwide, and fueled rampant speculation on commodity exchanges, leading to pronounced volatility that disrupted financial systems already strained by geopolitical uncertainty. As the conflict escalated beyond initial expectations, Iran's network of allied non-state actors, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite militias in Iraq, Houthi rebels in Yemen, and other affiliated groups, initiated coordinated attacks on Western interests, diplomatic missions, and infrastructure perceived to be connected to U.S. and allied objectives. effectively broadening the battleground into a multi-theater regional war. Rockets and insurgent operations targeted installations in northern Iraq and southern Lebanon, prompting international humanitarian concerns as civilian populations were caught between sporadic outbreaks of violence and sustained military engagements, while escalating retaliatory strikes by U.S. forces and partner militaries inflicted severe damage to suspected militant strongholds, often in densely populated urban areas, which amplified civilian casualties and triggered waves of displacement. The political landscape during these early months of the war became one of extraordinary fragmentation and uncertainty as global powers waited on the unfolding crisis. European Union nations called for de-escalation and convened emergency United Nations sessions to seek negotiated solutions. Russia and China urged restraint while leveraging the conflict to expand diplomatic influence, and regional actors like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt navigated a precarious balance between condemnation, opportunism, and strategic hedging, wary of the conflict's potential to redraw alliances and reshape the balance of power across the Middle East. The United Nations Security Council became a battleground of competing resolutions, with calls for ceasefires repeatedly obstructed by vetoes and counterproposals, illustrating profound divisions within the international community over responsibility, accountability, and the path forward. Economically, the conflict inflicted staggering costs. Global stock markets plunged in response to escalating hostilities and uncertainty, triggering sell-offs in energy, technology, and transportation sectors, while currencies of emerging economies experienced sharp devaluation due to capital flight and decreased investor confidence. The price of crude oil, already unstable due to supply chain interruptions, soared to historic highs, contributing to inflationary pressures that reverberated through consumer markets, raising costs for manufacturing, travel, and basic goods, and prompting central banks across continents to debate emergency monetary interventions. The disruption of trade routes through the Persian Gulf forced container ships to divert around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, adding weeks to delivery times and significantly increasing logistical costs, which had a cascading impact on already fragile global supply chains, particularly in electronics, automotive manufacturing, and agricultural commodities. Domestically within the United States, the protracted conflict became a central point of political contention, with public discourse sharply divided between calls for sustained military engagement to secure strategic objectives and urgent pleas for diplomatic negotiation to prevent further loss of life and economic hardship. The human cost of the war, both military and civilian, became a subject of intense media scrutiny as families of service members and affected civilians demanded clarity, accountability, and a clear strategy for resolution. In Iran, governmental narratives emphasized resistance, sovereignty, and defiance against what was portrayed as foreign aggression and imperial overreach, rallying nationalist sentiment while suppressing dissent, a move that further complicated international efforts at mediation and fueled internal polarization. As months passed, the war showed no signs of immediate resolution, and analysts began outlining potential future scenarios. In one, the conflict could evolve into a protracted stalemate, exhausting resources, hardening positions, and drawing additional regional powers either directly or through proxy engagements, with the risk of accidental escalation ever present. In another, mounting international pressure, particularly from economically interdependent nations whose markets suffered acutely from persistent instability, might force a negotiated ceasefire, leading to painstaking diplomatic talks aimed at establishing new frameworks for nuclear oversight, regional security guarantees, and phased withdrawal of military assets, though such talks would face immense mistrust and prerequisites that could take years to reconcile. A third possibility envisioned a fragmentation of command structures within Iran or the United States, driven by internal political changes, economic crises, or shifts in leadership, which could abruptly alter the trajectory of the war, either toward aggressive escalation or unilateral disengagement, each with unpredictable consequences for regional stability and global governance. Regardless of the specific path forward, the 2026 Iran-U.S. conflict has already reshaped international relations, underscoring fragility of peace in regions burdened by historical grievances and strategic rivalries, while challenging existing paradigms of diplomatic conflict resolution. It has served as a stark reminder that modern warfare, even when initiated by claims of preemptive defense or deterrence, can rapidly transcend intended objectives and engulf entire regions, disrupting economies, straining international institutions, and exacting a heavy toll on human lives. As the world continues to watch, analyze, and react to the unfolding developments, the legacy of this war, in terms of political relationships, economic realignments, technological warfare doctrines, and humanitarian repercussions, will likely influence global policy and strategic thinking for generations to come, prompting nations to reassess the cost of confrontation and the urgent need for resilient frameworks capable of preventing similar catastrophes in an increasingly interconnected and tense global environment.